Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Miss Jen and welcome to Sensory Solutions.
Kitty Quest Children's Museum!
Love of learning starts here.
Today we are going to talk about another super fun sensory bin. I already have it all set up here. If you watched last week's video, you will remember the same bin I used last time. It is a big clear plastic bin. We'll look at it a little more in a second, but the most important part is that it's big enough for all your materials and that the sides are tall enough to where you're not super worried about things splashing out. So with that being said, today we are using water in our sensory bin. So I have gathered different materials that I know will be really fun in water. When we are experimenting with a water sensory bin, a lot of what we're doing is thinking about sinking and floating and cause and effect. So I have gathered things that I know will float, things that I know will sink, and also just some different manipulatives that I can use to move and transfer water. So I have with me some cut up pool noodles because I know that they will float. I also found some sponges that I know will float in the water, but also once they soak up water will sink. So that's just kind of an interesting experiment. And then I gathered some little gems. You could also just use rocks because I know they will sink. Finally, I gathered some scoops because moving and transferring that water, while it's really fun, also teaches us a lot about cause and effect and also about early math skills. So all of these things are really fun as well as educational to put into a sensory bin. Last time we used rice, and the setup is very similar to water. It's the same in terms of you don't want to set it somewhere where if they tip it over or if it falls, that it will be really awful to clean up, right? So that's why I will be setting it up on the floor with a towel underneath. I think that that's the best way to do it. Keeps everything contained and it's really easy to clean up. Now that it's getting nice outside, you could also set this bin outside if you have an area where you could do that. It also does work on a table. You just have to watch it a little more. And you don't want to fill it up all the way to the top with water, right? That's just giving us so much excitement and so much splashing we can do. And while that is fun, it might just make this experience a little bit more stressful, especially if you haven't done a lot of sensory bins in the past. So I have all of my sinking and floating materials, my scoops. I went ahead and filled this about an inch full of water. And I also added watercolor and soap because I think that the watercolor just makes it a little more fun. You totally don't have to add it. But also the soap is really great because it keeps everything super clean, which is important. And also just having bubbles in your sensory bin makes it, I think, a more fun experience. It gives us more to look at. Popping bubbles, things like that. If the bubbles float or sink is also really interesting. So I have set up my bin already and let's go ahead and take a closer look. As you can see, I added some blue watercolor as well as some soap. And again, you don't need to add a ton of water. As you can see, it's just, probably about an inch of water. But you don't want to add so much that it's easy to tip over, or if it does tip over, it will cause a lot of concern. So you want to fill it up enough to where they can see what is sinking, what is floating, what's going on, just to experiment. And I think this is so fun because something they will end up experimenting with and learning is that this sponge will float, these rocks will sink, but what happens if I put the rocks on top of the sponge? Does the whole sponge sink or does it float still? There's a lot to experiment with here and figure out what happens when you do certain things. We're learning about cause and effect, sinking and floating, we're being creative. There's a lot to learn here in a water sensory bin. All right, everybody, thank you so much today for joining me for Sensory Solutions. I hope that this is a fun sensory bin you can do in your home with your kids. And just know that water is one of the best things to use because there is so much to learn from using a sensory bin with water, but also I think it's one of the easiest to keep up with and to clean up. So when you set it up, you can set it on the floor with a towel. This is also a really, really great one now that it's getting warmer outside, to set up and throw outside. If you have an outside area, you can do this, because then it doesn't really matter if the water gets on the ground. Plus it's warm, it just gives it a nice experience. You can also look around and see what other things from outside you could maybe throw in. Leaves, sticks, rocks, all of these different things are super fun. We just are working on experimenting with sinking and floating. So it's fun to have a variety of materials. It also really lends itself well to imaginative play, pretending that these things are boats or, all sorts of different things. It really just opens up our creative mind and lets us think of lots of different things we can do. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time on Sensory Solutions. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe for more videos, and remember to check out our website for additional activities and information.